Imagine you're a high-ranking Nazi officer in 1945. The Thousand-Year Reich just imploded in a pile of rubble and broken dreams. You've spent the last few years doing things that would make the devil himself take notes. And suddenly, everyone wants to have a very loud, very permanent conversation with you about war crimes. So what do? You don't stay for the trial. You grab a fake passport, a suit that doesn't smell like gunpowder, and you hop on a boat to South America. You settle down in a quiet suburb in Buenos Aires, start a small business, and maybe even join a local bowling league. You think you've pulled off the ultimate vanishing act. You think the world has moved on. And for a while, you're right. But while you're sipping Malbec and enjoying the sunset, there's a shadow moving through the streets that doesn't care about your new name or your reformed lifestyle. Meet the nightmare you thought you buried. This isn't a government agency with red tape and diplomatic immunity. This is a woman who saw your face through the barbed wire of a death camp, and she has a memory like a steel trap and a heart that turned into a block of dry ice a long time ago. She isn't here to arrest you. She isn't here to read you your rights. She's here to settle a debt that can only be paid in one currency. The world likes to talk about forgiveness and healing after a war. It's a nice sentiment for people who didn't lose everything they ever loved in a gas chamber. For the woman in the shadows, forgiveness is just a word for people who are too tired to fight. She spent years watching the big fish get all the headlines at Nuremberg, while the middle management monsters, the guys who actually pulled the triggers and turned the valves, simply walked away. They became doctors, grocery store owners, and kindly grandfathers. They thought the clock had run out on justice. They didn't realize that for some people, time doesn't move forward. It just circles around the moment the trauma started. Finding a ghost in a continent full of hiding spots isn't easy. It takes a specific kind of obsession, the kind that makes you skip meals and forget how to sleep. She started with fragments, a whispered name in a crowded cafe, a blurry photograph smuggled out of a government office, a specific way a man held his cigarette that matched a guard from Sobibor. Most people would call it madness. She called it a roadmap. She moved through the underground networks of post-war Europe and South America like a scalpel, cutting through the lies and the fake identities until she found the vein. Let's be real. Hunting Nazis in the 1950s was basically a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek where the it person has a Luger and a network of powerful friends. The local police were often in on the secret, or at least paid enough to look the other way. You couldn't trust the embassies, and you definitely couldn't trust the neighbors. It was a lonely, paranoid existence. But that was her advantage. When you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person in the room. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was only afraid of dying before she saw the light leave the eyes of the man who destroyed her world. One by one, the names on her list started getting crossed out. No fanfares, no news reports, just accidents that happened in dark alleys or quiet homes. A man falls off a pier in the middle of the night. Another mistakes a bottle of poison for his heart medication. It was clean, it was efficient, and it was terrifyingly personal. She was a one-woman wrecking crew, dismantling the lives of men who thought they were untouchable. And the best part? They never saw her coming. To them, she was just a waitress, a passerby, or a face in the crowd, right up until the moment she wasn't. The hunt reached its boiling point in a dusty, sun-scorched town where the air felt thick with the smell of diesel and old secrets. She had spent months tracking a ghost known as the Architect, a man who didn't just follow orders, illegally designing the very mechanisms of death she had barely escaped. He wasn't hiding in a bunker or a fortress. He was living as a respected clockmaker, a man whose hands were now famous for fixing time instead of ending it. The irony was almost poetic. She spent days watching him through a shop window, seeing him interact with children, handing out candies with the same fingers that once signed off on the liquidation of thousands. This is the moment where most people's dilemma kicks in. You start to wonder if he's changed, if he's paid his penance, or if he's just too old to matter anymore. But for her, there was zero room for debate. She didn't go for a grand cinematic showdown. She waited until the shop closed, until the streetlights flickered to life, casting long, skeletal shadows across the pavement. When she stepped into the back of his shop, the bell above the door made a tiny, cheerful chime that felt like a death knell. He didn't even look up at first. He just assumed it was a customer who forgot their watch. "We're closed," he said, his voice raspy and grandfatherly. Then he saw her. Not the woman she was now, but the girl she had been. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen in the thousands of faces that passed through his gates. He didn't scream, he didn't beg. He just sat there frozen as the ticking of 100 clocks filled the silence between them. The psychological weight of that silence was heavier than any lead. She didn't launch into a villainous monologue. She didn't need to. She just laid a single yellowed photograph on the counter, a picture of her family, the people he had helped erase from the map. She watched his eyes move from the photo to the silenced barrel of her pistol. In that moment, all the fake names, the new life in South America, and the decades of being a good citizen evaporated. He wasn't a clockmaker anymore. He was a monster who had run out of time. She saw the realization hit him, the understanding that justice wasn't a courtroom in Germany. It was a cold room in the middle of nowhere with a woman who had nothing left to lose. People like to believe that revenge is a fire that consumes the hunter, but for her, it was more like a surgical procedure. It was a cold, clinical necessity. She pulled the trigger once. No mess, no drama, just a quiet foot that ended a decade of nightmares. She didn't feel a rush of joy. She didn't feel healed. She just felt a slight loosening in her chest, the kind you feel when you finally finish a grueling, miserable job. She left the shop exactly as she found it, except for the man slumped over his workbench. She walked out into the cool night air of Buenos Aires, faded into the crowd, and became a ghost once again. This is the part the history books usually skip over because it doesn't fit the hero narrative. The world wants a clean ending where the bad guys go to jail and the good guys live happily ever after. But in the real world, the shadows are deeper. She continued her work, crossing names off her list until there were no names left. She lived the rest of her life in quiet anonymity, a woman who looked into the abyss and decided she was the scarier thing living inside it. She died an old woman in a small apartment, surrounded by books and silence, carrying secrets that would make a soldier's blood run cold. So next time you hear about a former official disappearing or an unexplained accident involving a man with a hidden past, don't be so quick to look for a conspiracy. Sometimes it's just a debt being collected. Sometimes there is no trial, no jury, and no mercy. Just a woman with a memory and a mission, proving that you can run across an ocean and change your name, but you can never outrun a shadow that has been waiting for you for 40 years. In her world, there were no second chances, no excuses, and absolutely zero dilemma.